And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thanks so much for joining us once again. And it's great to have that Alex woman back with us again, Alex Phillips. Alex, thank you so much for giving us your time as always.
My pleasure. It's always great to come on.
Oh, thank you. And we're doing this a few days before. I think actually this will go out Monday. We talked maybe we'll go out Thursday. So we'll go out a few days before the by-election. We'll get into all of that. Obviously follow there is Alex's handle and that alexwoman.com website. All the links will be in the description. I want to talk about all things shenanigans on the right of politics, but we'll get into that. But can I start with something very different? The last time I had you on, we talked about your baptism, and as it was filmed and made public, and I'm fascinated by that because Christianity and faith and what you do in life is so much more important than politics. And often we get caught up in the political side, thinking that's actually the be all and end all. But when I had you on, goodness, forever ago, I think, and we bumped into each other like a month ago. But you were talking about baptism and what that meant. Um, can I get an update? How's the Christian life going?
Well, it's wonderful, isn't it? And, the most frustrating thing about being a Christian is you just want everybody else to have that joy. You naturally become an evangelist because you think, wow, this is so good for me. If only everybody had this. And especially people who are good people, but might be going through hard times. And you just think, oh, if only you could believe, if only you had the sort of solace that I have, that sense of being able to lay everything at God's feet, and also the sense of the living God living in your chest, and the joy that brings. And I'd wish it's for anybody, enemies or friends, because if the whole world could become Christian, we really would have heaven on earth. It would be the kingdom of heaven here on earth. But it's, we must try as Christians to encourage people towards God, but it's not always easy, especially in the modern world. But for me, it's been, revolution. My canon messaged me the other day on my baptism birthday. And since then, I've been baptized again. Not that you can get baptized again, but more of a sort of recommittal in the River Jordan at the site where Jesus was baptized by John.
Seriously?
Yeah. And then I've also
Jealous.
been confirmed by the bishop. No, the archbishop, in fact. The archbishop of the Anglican American Church was over in the UK. So he then confirmed me when he was last in the UK. So I keep my joke is give me a few years and I'll be ordained.
Please no, please no. But how does, because I guess as a Christian, you look at what you do differently, some in the public eye, and can kind of, if you're not a Christian, you can decide actually what you're for is a certain agenda or a certain idea or a campaign or but then when you actually meet Christ, you're thinking, actually, I've got a new commission. And you talked about being commissioned, but a new commission to actually speak truth. And how does that do you kind of look at what you do maybe a little bit different? Do you kind of think through it a little bit more? Do you kind of think, okay,
Yeah.
maybe I need to go and talk to God about that? Kind of how does that work?
Well, that's the same with all aspects of life, isn't it? Once you become a Christian, you talk to God about a lot of it, all of your decisions, your choices, things that you feel ashamed of, things where you feel you might have not been entirely honest with yourself sometimes. Um, but of course, that even if you're the last person on earth and were a wretch, he still would have done what he did to save you. And it's a really humbling, comforting, grounding thing. It's what makes Christianity so special, actually. That ransom. But no, I pray every morning, just for guidance, because I realize now that I am a vessel of the Holy Spirit. And so I ask always that it's present in me and that I do God's work, that I can be of service as a voice with a platform, that I may help to advance the coming of his kingdom here on earth. And it's really difficult because some of the subjects we talk about, it's very polemical issues, things that get people very angry, divisive issues. And particularly when it comes to Islam and the Islamification of the UK or the Western world, really, what that means and where as a Christian we must stand on that. Because I've tried to look into the Bible, clearly the Bible doesn't say anything about Islam because it didn't exist until, wow, almost a millennia after the crucifixion of Christ. But there's a lot in the Old Testament, that I think very much foretells what is about to come to pass in Jeremiah, in Isaiah. As listening to Bible teaching just yesterday, And it was from Jeremiah, but actually it reflected very much passages that I've studied in Isaiah, because I've actually read that book fully. And it talks about when a nation turns its face away from God. I mean, in this context, it is the Jews, it is Israel, Zion, that when a nation turns its eyes away from God, that God has done everything to give them comfort, protection, to provide, to enable them to vanquish their enemies. That actually the first thing that seems to happen in those prophesied accounts is invasions by foreign forces who mean to do you and your children harm with wicked customs. And it's an interesting prophecy that appears a lot during the Old Testament. And what is interesting, of course, is you also have the historical bounds to people of those lands and their customs to today. So, of course, in the Bible, it's, I suppose, the arch enemies of the Jews in many respects are the Philistines, which, of course, the Romans then decided to, when they, destroyed the first temple, and decided to try and, take over the land. They called that particular region Philistinia, Palestine today. And so it's the echoes of what we're dealing with today, with men coming from not particularly that region, but from, I think, what the culture and therefore what became a religion that emanated from that region, being the ones to start storming, particularly the west of Europe, which I would argue is the part of Europe that has turned itself away from Christianity the most, turned away from traditional values. So we're not talking about the Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary, countries that have remained tightly controlling their borders, but also committed to traditional small c conservative Christian values. When we look at the invasions of these young fighting age foreign men from, I would argue, very warped cultures who do intend us harm, whether it be direct, immediate threats or whether it be over the long term demographic change, because that's also writ large, particularly in the Old Testament. Um, it's about how do we handle those issues? How do we speak about them without bringing, because as a Christian under the new covenant, you're very mindful of respecting the stranger, welcoming the foreigner, treating all as your neighbor, everyone as you would treat yourself. But then at the same time, I'm under no impression that whatever people might regard as the sort of turn the other cheek element of Christianity, that there is a sense that, God would want his people to just say, okay, take our lands and convert us all to your way. Um, Particularly as it does seem, through my own interpretation, of course, I'm not a theologian or a scholar, and I've still got my L plates on, but it does seem to me if you were going to pick out one movement, let's say one organization which stands at exact counterpoint to Christianity, despite it mentioning Jesus, it would be Islam. And it has been historically. And when you look back through history, of course, the Crusades were led by believing Christians to go and defend the Holy Land. So, how we handle the largely Muslim, huge waves of illegal immigration into Western Europe as Christians, as one of the most poignant subjects, it's complex because you do have to find yourself having recourse to the Bible and say, well, what does this mean existentially for our land? Um, but also, not to persecute. If someone's brought up in a Muslim country and they've been essentially brainwashed into being of that religion, it hasn't been by their choice necessarily. They didn't, demand as a fetus, I want to be a Muslim, and be brought up in a radical Muslim environment. And there's still a human soul underneath all of that. So how do we separate the individual from the existential crisis, if that makes sense, and handle one element with compassion and the other element, I think, with necessary might, necessary pushback? I think the answer actually is, as I was saying, suggested by those prophets, the answer is to reinforce and be more confident in our own religion, because that is the greatest force field against an invading culture, which is to hold tightly and deeply onto your own. And my gosh, hasn't it been such a successful religion and culture for 2 millennia now in this land? So
Well, it
yeah, I
has.
suppose that's a long answer to your question, wasn't it? But that is a sort of that's how the sort of things that go on in my head when I'm thinking about my work.
Well, we need confident Christianity, and that's been completely abandoned. Just one more thing before jumping to politics. It's interesting when you talk to Christians about God actually speaking and engaging with you and guiding you. I went to HTB on Sunday. Don't normally go to HTB, normally go
Oh, my
to
church.
KT, but I thought actually I'll go to HTB
Mm.
just for something different. And it was like the sermon was written for me, and you kind of come away and you realize that God uses all different ways to guide you. And sometimes you can go to church and you hear a sermon and it's like, that's good. And sometimes like, sorry, God, were you just writing this because you wanted to guide? And kind of what is it like for you? Because it's, I think, important for those who are not Christians to realize that Christianity is there to actually guide you into all truth. And God uses many ways to do that.
Yeah, what is the most remarkable thing? It's how hands-on he is. I mean, what led me to Christianity in the first place was a very interventionist, hands-on approach by God leading me there. You know, it's a difficult thing to talk about with non-Christians because until it happens to you, it sounds sort of arrogant, but also impossible to explain. If I were to say, I didn't choose God, he chose me. I was very resistant. I was not running at it, going, I really want to be a Christian. I was doing the opposite. I was going in very much the opposite direction. I studied philosophy and metaphysics, and my brain is a very logical one. I like evidence. I like proof. I like empirical data. Naturally, quite cynical when it comes to ways of life and things like that. But he, over a long period of time, kept doing things in a way that in the end it became impossible to ignore. I was like, okay, I'm either losing my marbles or I need to get into a church right now because of so many things having happened. I won't detail. It wouldn't be appropriate to detail them here, I don't think. Maybe one day I'll explain to people. But when you suddenly have his presence, sometimes, he's always with you, but sometimes there are times when he is deliberately intervening because there's no other explanation for it. There are coincidences in life, of course, but every now and then there are sequences that you look back and you go, "That wasn't a coincidence. That was a God incidence." And that has been happening to me a lot again recently. The minute I sort of feel like I may have lost my way a bit, or pulled back a bit from faith, or prioritized other things ahead of it, he always finds a way to come and nudge me, whether it's via a friend or via a circumstance or just via he's got a great sense of humor at times, and you just go, "Okay." So an example is I always listen to talking about HTB, which is my church. I always listen to the Bible in a year by Nicky Gumbel, but I do it as a bit of a tombola. I don't follow it chronologically. Sometimes I miss a day because I've been super busy, and I might go to the next day, and I just end up going all over the board. Um, and I'd been reading, so I'm trying to read the whole Bible at the moment. I'd been reading Jeremiah and a particular verse and a passage. And I'd just come back from Israel, and having read that particular verse and passage, it's all on one day. Having read that particular verse and passage that morning, I then put on the Bible in one year, and it was that particular verse and passage. I was in Israel, and we went to the city of David where they're excavating the original city underneath the old town of Jerusalem. And as we stood there, the archaeologist said, does anyone know what this is? And it was like a seal. And he said, "Well, let me explain. Is anyone reading the Bible?" And I sort of put up my hand, and he said, "Has anyone read Jeremiah?" And I thought, "That's weird. That's what I'm reading right now." And it was the exact same verse. And it was where they come to arrest Jeremiah, and it was the seals of the two guards who arrested him that the archaeologist was showing me. And I laughed and thought, well, that's funny, isn't it? So then I kind of decided I'd go on to AI and say, what are the probability of having read that particular verse in the Bible, that verse being the one that comes up on, a series which has an episode every single day, so 365 episodes, but covers again the whole Bible, and that particular verse being mentioned by the archaeologist. And it just said, this is statistically impossible. This is mathematically not possible because you're talking about, not, it just said, no, 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 that can't be, the answer. And they sort of explain this through logic and equations. That really appeals to me, having done metaphysics. They did all the sort of balance of probabilities and the odds of that happening. And that's when you just go, well done. Well done for pointing yourself out to me. Well done for manifesting for me. So,
It's like, Michaela Peterson talks about her becoming Christian, and people need to watch it, and she talks about 3 situations that could not be fixed, and
yeah.
someone said, "Hey, you should talk to God about it," and she did, and so within the next week, everything was fixed in a way that was impossible, and that's how she became a Christian. Or C.S. Lewis talks about being the most reluctant Christian in England, whenever he and it's fascinating to hear those stories. But, well, have you just got back from Israel?
No, so that particular incident was a year ago.
Okay, okay, okay.
I was in this, and was it a year ago? October. Last October, I was in Israel, so it was last October that happened. But he's been at work again lately. He put a smile on my face on Friday through a sort of sequence of similarly impossible coincidences. So he's nudged me again and said, "Come on, Alex. I'm still here. Have faith, girl. I'm with you." That's the way I
Absolutely.
see it when he intervenes. He's just reminding you that he's your father and he loves you, and it's a really beautiful thing.
Come on. Right. Let's get into politics.
Oh yeah, there we go. Gear shift.
That's
Oh,
don't normally. It's fun talking to people about stuff they don't normally talk about, and that's why I love getting guests on and dropping things in and talking to them after, and them saying, actually, don't normally talk about that. That was different. So, but we'll get into your usual bread and butter.
yeah.
Let's get into. We have reform. Yeah, we're putting this on Monday, and so it'll just be a few days before Nigel v. Binface, which is a weird by-election. What are your thoughts on that? Does this maybe mention the circumstance that happened for our US audience? And then does this give Nigel a clean bill of health in terms of the allegations from election authorities or parliamentary officials?
Well, of course it doesn't, but I think it's a canny move. I don't like it, if I'm honest. I don't like the move, but it's a canny move. Okay, so to explain to the American audience, I think that what we can conclude is that, they'll have seen Trump having lawfare thrown at him every which way. They're doing the same, not just to Nigel Farage, but to all of reform. They're digging up anything and everything. There's leaked accountancy things. I mean, the latest allegation against Richard Tice for failing to say something at the start of a debate and that being it is madness. There's about 67 or something Labour MPs who are sort of, who have accidentally not followed exact protocol is the better way of looking at it. But of course, it becomes some sort of front page thing because it's reform. And this is definite lawfare and they are throwing everything at him. Now, is there arguments to say, well, look, some of these things should be scrutinized and need to be scrutinized? Well, yes, possibly. And I think that it is important in politics to not shy away from scrutiny and accountability. And in some part, calling the by election sort of does look like that. But at the same time, it was very clear that this was all going to be weaponized and they were going to force him to have a by election anyway. The difference is they would have decided on the timetable and they would have probably held back lawfare and munitions in order to rumble him as much as possible before calling the by-election. I still think he would have won it in the future. Um, by saying, well, look, if you're going to force me to go back to my constituents to see whether or not they want me to be an MP, let's do it. Let's do it right now. And so he's taken control of the situation and the narrative. He will obviously win, probably 70% of the vote, I guess. The rest of the party's boycotting it and all laughing, snickering about Count Binface, I think is quite symbolic, really, of what the establishment are like in this country. They have such utter disdain for the voters. It's not about the voters. It's not about, oh, they don't deserve to have a candidate in Clacton. We'll all go along with the charade of Andy Burnham's by-election in Makerfield so he can become the Prime Minister without any vote being directly cast for his mandate. That's fine. We'll all go along and compete in that one. But when it's Nigel Farage saying to his constituents, they're trying to boot me out of office, so I'm putting it in your hands, who are the people he is directly accountable to, they then boycott it. And they all clamour behind, a BBC left-wing comedian who walks around with a dustbin on his head, and they think they're being oh so clever. And I just think it is so representative of the attitude now of these elitist metropolitan middle classes who dominate politics. And they all did the same. Oh, ha, ha, ha. Nigel Farage is going to be fighting all summer against a bin. And you think, no, these are the people of Clacton being asked. This man is being dragged through the coals. His integrity is being challenged. Do you still want him, or would you like one of these other candidates? The fact that they instead think it's some sort of Sesame Street episode, just tells you what they're all about. They don't believe in democracy. It's an inconvenience. They always want to have it their own way, and they get away with it, and they're audacious. They're audacious and arrogant in their treatment of the average voter in Britain, whether that be a voter in Aberdeen, where the Conservatives recently won a by-election and Restore Britain decided not to field a candidate, or the voters in Makerfield, where 20,000 voted for Andy Burnham, 0.03% of the population of this country, to technically become Prime Minister, although even then I think they were still voting Starmer out, or the people of Clacton. And this has been going on for too long now, and it's a rot at the heart of politics. So Godspeed, Nigel. I think he's going to win. Of course, when he does, the Standards Committee will all sort of reactivate. And during this time, they're still lobbying as much as they can. They will do everything. They will, find any sort of peccadillo. You can't. So when they've decided they want to execute you, you cannot escape it. Actually, there's allegory there in the Bible, isn't there? When you look at the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Romans and Jesus, doesn't matter if you're an innocent person. Their intention is to persecute you. And so that is what's going on, I believe, strongly against Nigel. And he'll be re-elected. And then when they try and push him to have another by-election, it will look farcical because they'll be going straight back to the same people at Clacton, and he's done all the campaigning. And the messaging is already out there, that this is lawfare. So he'll just win again, and then it will look like a waste of money. So I think on some way it's a canny move, but it makes me uncomfortable. I don't like it. I don't like the fact it's had to be called, if it did have to be called, but I think it probably did for political survival, not political survival, but to control the narrative and not be pushed about. Um,
No, I agree
I
because
think,
I remember I wrote an article on Gateway Pundit saying actually I did think it was a very smart move politically. I don't know whether it had to happen or should, but I think you're right, Nigel, pulling back the narrative on himself and taking control of it. But when I mean I was actually on with Mike Graham last week the first time, and he is maybe much more pro. I'm maybe more in the Dan Wootton and more critical in some stuff that's happened. But we were talking about the huge change that's happened where a couple of years Nigel was headed and then seemed to be a period of maybe 3 years ago where I remember that the Evening Standard had like this 12-page article in their magazine, a photo shoot with Nigel, and it seemed to be a love-in. Now it's gone back the other way, and there seems to be utter anger and hate, and Nigel is being targeted by all of them. And it's weird how the media have gone. I don't know if you've kind of seen that move to where we are now to, and I think Nigel is the most vilified figure. I 100% agree with that. I just had issue with him kind of using that victim mentality at that press conference.
ah, I don't think it is a victim mentality. I think it's just saying to people, this is what's going on. Be very clear about how the establishment operates. They did it to Marine Le Pen in France. They did it to Geert Wilders. They would do it against the AfD. In fact, I think in Germany, the High Court or Supreme Court have just moved to try and ban the AfD from participating in elections. They did it against Donald Trump. People have got to realize, they've got to wake up to the fact that these populist leaders are populist because they are the voice of the people. The issues that we think are critical, mass immigration, lawlessness, sweeping cultural change, the growth of radical leftism, woke, and all the sort of, hateful, irreligious faux morality and censorship and persecution that brings. And when you try and stand up against the muscularity of that machine, that global socialist machine, you will be attacked, you will be vilified. They will stop at nothing to try and stop you. And it might be stop at nothing to stop Nigel Farage, but in this instant, Nigel Farage is the people. He represents the people. And one thing that is really upsetting me about the split on the right, if I'm honest with you. So I worked for Nigel Farage for a long time. 2009, I went to work for Nigel Farage. And then 2013, 14, 15, as his right-hand woman, we're still, in regular contact and very close now. And what I've seen during the course of that period is a man be ostracized, lambasted, vilified for sticking his neck out and saying we should have sovereignty and we should control our borders. And he was known as a hate character, a racist, a monster. Certainly when I was his right-hand woman, we did a lot of work to undo a lot of that. And he became almost a national treasure. But he's always been firm in his beliefs, regardless of consequence. Meanwhile, Kemi Badenoch has sort of, climbed up during the ranks of the Conservative Party, who have been the ones attacking Nigel. 15 years in power, they didn't leave the ECHR, they didn't control the borders. In fact, they've set off internal coups against anyone in the party who have tried to do those things. Rupert Lowe, who always was a big donor to Conservative Party, peddling their line, now in cahoots with the Conservatives to try and attack Nigel Farage. And all the while, Lowe and Badenoch are trying to tell everyone that they're more Farage than Nigel Farage. And I'm like, you're not the authentic product. You weren't there. You weren't saying these things 30 years ago or 20 years ago. You weren't fighting this case when nobody else was. You weren't the vanguard. You weren't setting the way. So all of them could now come behind him. And I think there's something really wicked about that. If you look at when there was UKIP versus the Conservative Party, right, when I was Nigel's right-hand woman, 2013, 14, 15, it was David Cameron. David Cameron and the Labour Party were identical. You couldn't put a fag paper between them. What UKIP and Nigel Farage represented was something radically different on the right from David Cameron. David Cameron, Remainer, open borders, hug a hoodie, climate change, all of that. And then what I call the real right wing. What you've got now, if you were to lay down the policies or the manifestos, white paper, the manifestos, white label, the manifestos of the Conservatives, Restore and Reform, they all basically are identical. Maybe a difference in number here or there. They're basically identical. And they're all trying to compete against each other because the Conservatives still want to be in power. So they've got to out Nigel and best Nigel and get rid of him, despite the fact we know the Conservatives are not authentic, that they cannot be trusted because they've had ample opportunity. And we see what they do to the rightists in their parties. Whatever Badenoch might say, she is still, I'm afraid, going to be the puppet of the men in grey suits in the corridors of power. And then Rupert Lowe, who is just, he's a fool. He's an egoist, a fool, and a charlatan. And how dare he work on behalf of the Conservative Party to try and destroy Farage and try and split the vote in the Red Wall to make sure Reform can't get a majority. So the Conservatives, the same Conservatives who were the architects of the ruination of this country over the past 15 years, to just put them straight back in position, because that's what he's doing. And I thought they had a big argument. I know that they've had a big bust up, Rupert and his Tory friends. So it doesn't surprise me. He came out and made a video the other day going, come on, Nigel, let's do a deal. It's so disingenuous. It's a game. It's a game. It's emotional blackmail, because it's not let's do a deal for the sake of the country. It's like, I'm going to demand you do these things or else. If you don't do A, B, C, D, and E, I will stand candidates, and that 5% will stop you from winning in those seats and stop you getting majority. It's a threat. It's not Mr. Oh, aren't I lovely? Aren't I noble? Come and work together. No, it is a direct threat. And if anyone likes playing the victim game, Rupert Lowe can't help talking about the fact he was thrown out the party, boo-hoo, millionaire, 68-year-old man with expanses of farmland just up the road from me. Seriously? Are we to worry that you're that sensitive?
Well, let me get into that, because we've seen this kind of split on the right. And I think whatever anyone says, Rupert Lowe, what he has done with Restore is intriguing. Getting
He's done
what
nothing.
5-6, well, getting 5-6%, but
He's not done that. He doesn't know what's going on. The man hasn't got consistency on opinions. He says one thing in this interview, a different thing in that. He's an old gopher who's sitting on his lawnmower just up the road on beautiful farmland in Withington. That's what he's doing. He's got a load of young bloods who are clever at doing algorithms on social media, got the backing of Elon Musk, who boosts all of his posts. And I would imagine a lot of the sophisticated architecture, because when it comes to creating bot farms and beating algorithms and getting voter data to do GOTV and constituencies, Restore doesn't have that. I'm sorry. Rupert Lowe, one MP, and, 3 sort of right-wing young men who've never had a job before in their lives, and not changed. That's not them. Peter, I've worked in politics for 20 years. In order to get that sort of response on social media, you have to put in millions. You have to have very sophisticated operations. Same with voter data. They, in Makerfield, they were targeting all the Reform, with the pace of Reform voters were. Where did they get that data from? You have to have gone out polling, campaigning, door knocking to build that database. They are not. It's not Rupert Lowe by himself. He's just, like I said, no gopher. Don't know what's going on. And if you actually track the things he said over the years, there's zero consistency, zero, because it's not authentic. It's not real. He'll blow with the wind, say what he wants to say because he's arrogant. But he also, Rupert unfortunately does believe it's all him, and that he is the second coming of Christ. He's the one I think with a Messiah complex. But look, I've been in politics 20 years, Peter. I'm not saying this because I'm some sort of, yes, of course I'm loyal to Nigel. And so there will be an element of bias there, but I'm not making this up. This is not me spinning out falsehoods because I'd do anything to protect Nigel Farage. I'd do anything to protect this country and our democracy and our freedoms, which means we need a proper right-wing government. And we're not going to get that. We're not going to get that unless Reform have a majority, because if it's not a Reform majority, the same Conservatives, who quite frankly are leftists and global socialists, are going to be back in charge. And this is the reality of the situation. I've got the evidence. I've seen the receipts. They are privileged documents that I cannot publicize for legal reasons, but I know exactly what they contain. I'm not a fantasist. I'm not a game player. I haven't got the time to play games. This is the 11th hour. Our civilization and the future of our continent and our country depend on us getting this right. And I'm sick to death with the Tories playing games. Power games, faction fighting, coups, plots, besmirchment, scandal, leaks. They're doing it all over again
Well,
at
that's
the
what they've done
moment where
for.
we could potentially actually get what we've always wanted. And Rupert Lowe's a useful idiot. And that's just the truth. That isn't me being, you know, unpleasant. It's me being honest, because people deserve to know, and they don't just deserve to know, they need to know, because the situation is far too critical, Peter, for this stuff to just, oh, ignore it, never mind. Oh, well, Reform didn't get a majority because didn't Restore do well? I mean, come on, let's not play. This is
No,
not the time to play.
look, the Tories have had 200 years, and they are the masters of political shenanigans. Let's put it that way. But can because obviously you referred to it a little bit, the Nadine Dorris article I read, you'd reposted in the Mail about Rupert meeting with the Tories,
Yeah.
and it's kind of weird because I happily voted DUP, voted Tory, voted UKIP. Now I want a Tory party burned to the ground. I despise them for what they've done over 14 years. And yet I see a lot of the kids around Rupert, that you're right, have never worked a day in their lives. I don't know how that they can actually tell us what policy is whenever
They're
they have no idea.
influencers, Peter. They're no different from 14-year-olds, girls pouting on Instagram. They're influencers, and they're pretty
I know.
unpleasant sometimes as well. They're not
But they're also
they
Tory
profess to be good
boys.
Christian men, but very often they don't seem to act in that manner.
No, I agree, but they're also Tory boys. And this is what I really I whenever, I mean, Jared Batten used to tell me, "Never trust the Tories." What do you mean? I said, "Actually, he was right." And that kind of feeling. But tell a little bit about that Rupert Lowe kind of wanting to be welcomed in to the Conservative Party. I think it was he wanted a peerage and deputy PM or something from
Oh,
what I read. But yeah,
this goes
that
back a long
worries me.
time. It goes back a long time. He was always close to the Conservative Party donor. He wants the slap on the back at the Farmers Club or the Private Members Club, the peerage. He wants to sit at the top table. He sits on boards with Rishi Sunak's wife. He's made a lot of money out of net zero, ironically. And he's always wanted to run in those circles, those sort of high society circles, as far as I can tell. And he first started making deals with the Conservatives that I know about in 2019 when he was a Brexit Party MEP, a list called Men and Measures that he was working on with a very key figure inside the Conservative Party, not a household name, but a man who is pretty terrifying. And they were writing up a list of peerages and positions for Brexit Party candidates who would stand down or defect to the Conservatives, and similarly punishments for those who would not, because it works both ways. And of course, he stood down first at Dudley North, a very winnable seat. But he did it at the very last minute, so the candidate couldn't be replaced. And he did it on the day that there's going to be a huge rally, that Nigel was going to do a big rally there to support Rupert, to try and help him become an MP. Fairly certain he did that at the Tories' behest. So when he came back into Reform, this was before Nigel was back as leader. Richard Ty said, "Yeah, fine, get back in." Again, he was given one of the best seats, Great Yarmouth. That's not Magic Rupert who's done that through his own hard work. He was gifted the seat of Great Yarmouth, which was always going to vote for Reform, and voted a majority for Reform because Nigel had come back as leader. That is not, that's just a fact. If Nigel hadn't come back as leader, would Rupert by himself have taken Great Yarmouth? Probably not, no. And the minute that he gets that seat, he's already defecating where he eats and being unpleasant to his colleagues and bullying and becomes impossible in meetings. And what's happening is the algorithms are being fed on social media. So all he's got is impressions, impressions. His relationship with Nigel started to sour because a bit like that sort of blackmail video he's just put out, it was like that. Do this or else. Say this or else. And Nigel's like, no, 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 no. I'm not going to. I want to be the next prime minister. I'm not going to turn around and say we're going to deport 5 million people until we've got the mechanisms in place, the legal structures, a policy document that can actually prop that up. And that's got to be done properly and meticulously. I mean, Rupert is just a blunt tool. He wants to just shout, oh, the Islamification of Europe. Well, yes, I'm worried about it. We've been talking about it. But how are you going to handle this? What are you going to do? Because just jumping up and down going, I'm going to ban kosher meat and halal meat. Well, and then he pretends it's animal welfare, which it isn't. He goes out shooting,
Yes.
and let's have a, is it really, save the creatures? Um, I wouldn't want to necessarily ban kosher because I think the Jewish community are under so much attack right now from the far left and the far right and everything in the middle and the Muslims. Leave them alone. Um, when it comes to halal, actually, a huge proportion of halal meat is pre-stunned now. It is. So, that eradicates that, doesn't it? Um, and like I said, you've got to think about people. You've got to think about how you tackle something culturally, politically, societally, rather than try and make life difficult for the individual. And I think there's a big argument to be had about the nature of slaughter and practices in abattoirs and things like that. And I think that's important. I think there's also a huge conversation to be had about allowing one particular religion to seemingly trammel all over society and have their own way and still scream that there's, a vengeance narrative, a grievance narrative. I think we've got to reinforce our own culture. I think we do have to make sure foreigners who have committed crimes are deported, that those who don't integrate are effectively made to. I'd look at translating services and things like that. You get an injury in Spain, you're not automatically getting an English speaking translator. You have to deal with it. We can look at many other ways in which we have become a siloed, balkanized society and how to try and reverse some of that. We could talk about why aren't we filming inside mosques and ejecting radical preachers and closing them down? Why aren't we investigating the money flows to non-governmental organizations, faith-based charities, so to speak, which often are the mouthpieces and operatives of organizations such as the Muslim Brotherhood? We should be talking about banning that. Now that is constructive. That is sensible. That's grown up. That's the route that reform's gone down. That's the route I think we have to go down, unless we do want a civil war. Because believe me, if you start turning around going, that's it, there'll be no halal meat, what do you think the Muslims in this country are going to do? All those young men with weapons in their mosques. What do you think all the sleeper cells and the terrorists that have been sent into Britain, largely via legal migration, who through Operation Scatter and HMOs all around the country, what do you think they're going to do? You're lighting the blue touch paper to give them the justification to go out and start war. And I don't want civil war. And you know what? If it comes, I'd say more when it comes, Rupert Lowe will be on his multi-acre farm in the middle of nowhere in the leafy Cotswolds. He won't be driving through roadblocks where terrorists are shooting him point blank in the face. It will be the working class people again who will bear the brunt. We live in such a febrile time, such a difficult time, that I'm afraid Rupert Lowe's narcissistic sledgehammer approach is deeply, deeply unwelcome when we really do have critical issues to sort out in this nation and in the West.
Yeah, I agree. But I would, I think I would ban halal but not kosher, but simply because Jews live in very concentrated areas, and that is for the Jewish community. Where I see halal as part of the expansion of Islam and its
Right.
spread, and I don't have a choice in my high streets. In most high streets in London, you don't have a choice
So
if you
that's
go to a takeaway, and
right.
I
So
want
that's
choice.
where you can put in legislation to say that there needs to be the choice, that we shouldn't have halal automatically imposed upon us. That all halal has to be done pre-stunned, that it has to be clearly labelled, that it shouldn't be the sort of go-to meat in a school or a football ground or a McDonald's. It should be, a specific secondary choice if people have that sort of, religious need to have halal meat. You can put all these other things around it to sort of cage it in and say, right, you want this in your community, you have it just in your community. Don't impose it, don't spread it, don't use it as a battering ram to re-civilize us or decivilize us. So there are other ways. These conversations need to be nuanced, because what you've got to realize is anything we do right now will create a backlash. And that's not our fault. We didn't ask for that. We've had decades of failure, of being infiltrated by a hostile faith and hostile culture, terrorist organizations, um, entire communities who don't want to integrate. They want to take over. They want to dominate. We pander to them. They get their own way. They play the victim card, and they use it in order to suppress us, the natives. I'm not shy about saying that, but what you've got to understand is this has created a pressure cooker. And just going, I'm going to ban all halal meat. You really want to know what's going to happen if a government turns around and says that? Do you want to see what happens? Because I don't want to live through that. I've got a big town down the road, big multicultural town, huge Muslim population there. I don't want them running out of that town with machetes, zombie knives, guns. We have jihadist training camps all over the UK. But we do. They're getting young Muslim men to go join Muslim summer school. Let's pray together and learn how to do drone making, paintballing, and parkour. That's training for war. This is happening in the UK. Make no mistake, if Rupert Lowe was Prime Minister, blood on the streets. Blood on the streets. And some people might want there to be a final reckoning. Some people might have a thrill about the idea that there's something sort of eschatological about what might come to pass in Europe, and are hungering for the fight, clamoring for it. But all these people sitting behind their laptops in their studios doing their clever podcasts, most of them don't even have driving licenses. Are you telling me that they're going to be picking up arms and defending this country? That they're going to be on the front lines fighting to protect us when that day cometh? No, they're not.
No,
They're
no,
boys.
no.
They're boys. And it will be the sort of people I grew up with in Gloucester, big multiculti city with, a mosque that bred Richard Reed, the shoe bomber. They'll be called up to the front lines. Not Rupert, posh Rupert on his farm, and is oh so smart, never had a job, don't even have a driving license, sort of soy boy acolytes online, his influencers. So be careful, because this is not the time to F about. It's very dangerous.
Can I just to finish off ask you about because it's a very difficult time, I think, for reform, precarious, because you've got 3 years, and I think it probably will be that length of time, just because of the large Labour majority, and they don't want to vote themselves out of a job. So you could have up to 3 years, and it's reform or a target all that time. And I mean, I was impressed by as much. I don't like being impressed by Zia Yusuf, but anyway, the press conference this morning on companies and illegal immigrants and what they do, I mean, really good. And he took questions for a long time, as does Nigel. There's that openness and honesty with the audience, with the media there. But yeah, it is a long 3 year period of keep focusing, keep marking. But then I guess Nigel has done this for we're getting close to 3 decades now, so he is the master at this.
Yeah, and I think also it's sort of well-trodden ground, isn't it, when we look at other elections in the West, Trump particularly, like I said before, Marine Le Pen in France. This is the playbook. And I think a lot of the general public recognize it for what it is. And I kind of hope they overplay their hand. There's something, if they had gone after Donald Trump for one thing only and found the one, the sucker punch that landed, it could have destroyed him. It just went for everything. And people then start to see through it and go, okay. And actually, if you look, despite all of this stuff, the polling for reform hasn't changed that much. There's been a burn and bounce, but those people who have sort of had a sense of, well, I've always voted Labour, but Labour have been failing me, might have a moment of refreshment where they think, actually, maybe this is going to work. But I think that will fade. And I think those votes will go back to reform and unlikely to go to the Conservatives. I think the Conservatives need to be held more accountable. At the moment, they don't exist. It's just Kenny Badenoch, isn't it? I mean, who else is there? They're frightened of their own branding. So discredited is it? So it'd be interesting to see what they do. I think they've probably peaked, but there will be voters who are leaving Reform because of the lawfare and go, "Oh, I don't trust Nigel anymore." And there'll be some who have gone over to Restore, which in some respects is, I suppose, the bigger threat, because if the 5% that Restore gets in red wall places where the Conservatives can't get those votes, which is exactly why the Conservatives wanted Restore, to compress Reform in areas that the Conservatives have no hope of doing that, as we saw in places like Makerfield, Greater Manchester mayoral election, etc. That is a function of Restore. And it's also not an accident that it's got a name that sounds so similar to Reform, because you even pick up the odd, in a general election, extra 100,000 votes, whatever, in a constituency, just people who make mistakes with the name of the party. I'm amazed it was enabled to be registered, but that's also a cynical choice and done very deliberately. I know all the tricks in the trade. Peter, I've worked in politics for 2 decades, so I can see through them all. It's cynical and it's evil. It's evil to deny people a choice in democracy. Conservatives can set out their stall and be one nation conservatives, right? Because that's what they are. Be honest about it. Restore can just turn around and say, we've been helping the Conservatives all this time because we put those desperate to become deputy prime minister. And then when people want reform and Farageism, which is a thing, a policy, an ideology that's existed for 30 years, like you said, let them blimmin' vote for it. But don't play these games where you all pretend to be Nigel Farage while killing Nigel Farage. It's sick. It's
I agree.
awful, because at the end of the day, we don't get what we need, what we voted for or what we need. They're playing games with us. They play games with the system. They, like I said, boycott elections, cancel elections, overturn elections, gerrymander, change the nature of the plebiscite, as they did. I mean, make no mistake, look what's just happened in the Greater Manchester mayoral election. They changed the way that people vote, transferable vote. That was basically used as a laboratory for votes rigging the general election. This is what the establishment do. This is how the establishment work. This is what is happening before our eyes. And it breaks my heart when I see sensible people dragged into these games, sucked into the idea that, actually Rupert Lowe is a solution, not Nigel Farage, when I know what's going on. I know he's a sham. I know he's a charlatan. And I know why he's doing what he's doing. I don't think he knows why he's doing what he's doing. I think he just wants, acclaim and position, and also is very high on his own Kool-Aid. But the people who are handling him know exactly what they're doing. And it breaks my heart that we don't have time for these games. This is critical in this country. And I'd love to appeal to someone like Elon Musk to say, Elon, step out of it. You don't know what you're doing. And if you really knew what was going on, you would not be doing it. You don't have to love Nigel Farage as a person. I do. He's been one of my closest friends for 20 years. I adore him to the bone. He's one of the most loyal friends, one of the most hardworking, brave, consistent people I've ever met. But that's my view. I know him personally. And I would say to anybody, actually, this is the man that you're dealing with, and he's wonderful. But hey, I'm pretty sure that I would not have gotten along with Winston Churchill. He was a grump. He was a misogynist. He had temper tantrums. He was drunk until about midday. But by God, wasn't he an amazing prime minister?
Yeah.
You don't have to love everything someone does or think that, there's some sort of Puritan where light shines out of their backside. This is what the Labour Party did because it's the right thing to do. Andy, for us, be kind. Let's not get dragged into emoji politics. Let's be the adults and look at what actually needs to happen to affect the change the country needs. And that means the scales need to fall off people's eyes when it comes to this game between the Conservatives and Restore. They really do. I'm not asking you to suddenly decide Nigel Farage is the best person on earth. I might think that. But, if you don't know him and have not worked with him, you might not share those attitudes. But also, do we need to have as leaders someone who we want to be our best mate, or someone who is going to get closest to delivering in government the things that we need to be delivered? Now, if you look at it through that lens, is that going to be Kemi Badenoch? Is that going to be Rupert Lowe? Is he going to become Prime Minister? No. So what choice are you left with?
I agree. Well, looking forward to that election in a few days after when this goes out. I think any political party should stand in an election. If they don't, then what's the point of them being around? But Alex is someone who never have to ask you, Alex, what do you really think? So always fun to have people on it, just say, because that's what you want. You want honesty and you want people to actually give their viewpoint. So really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much for
My
giving us
pleasure.
your time.
Thank you.